What can you honestly say about Fullmetal Alchemist that has not already been said? Well, look, unless you've been living underneath a rock the past few decades, you've probably heard of this series before. It's incredibly popular, and it's almost always voted the highest anime rating on whatever website that you go to. It has millions of fans all around the world, and lots of people that hold it very dear to their hearts. So it's to that level where there's even a huge base of other people constantly trying to argue how overrated it is because so many people like it. And it has two anime adaptations. The first was just called Fullmetal Alchemist from 2003. And with that one, after a certain point, it completely deviates from the manga and creates its own story that a lot of fans still genuinely find pretty good, and some don't really care for. Then there was Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood from 2009, which is a full, complete adaptation of the manga. I have seen both of these versions, and I enjoy them each in their own way, but I figured it was finally time for me to go to the original source of the story, the actual manga version, and tell you guys how I feel about it, and if, after all this time, I still feel like it's worthy of being called a masterpiece. I'm not going to go into the whole plot, but if you have never heard of Fullmetal Alchemist before, for some reason, the overall gist of the story is this. There's dozens upon dozens of characters in this thing, but the prime focal ones are two brothers named Edward and Alphonse Elric. They live in this fictional world where alchemy has become the prime and accepted science, and through studying the chemical makeup and creation of matter, human beings who study and practice within the world of alchemy are able to use it to do some pretty impressive things. For instance, if you have all the materials that make up a clock radio, you could accumulate all those materials within what's called a transmutation circle, activate that circle, and then assemble the clock within an instant. It is treated as a science and not so much like a magic or secret power, even though it is essentially the power system used in this manga. But it's based within this idea of equivalent exchange, that matter cannot be created or destroyed, but only transferred or manipulated into something else. If something is to be gained, something of equal value must be lost. It sets the ground rules that something cannot be created out of nothing, and that all materials in the world work as one of a whole. But I'll get back to that concept in a moment. The story kicks off because Ed and Al are abandoned by their father, and once their mother dies, they are kind of left alone and distraught with nothing but their bond as brothers to keep them afloat. Well, that and their very intense knowledge of alchemy. Together, they decide to try an ultimate taboo, an exchange that was said not to be able to be done. They try to use alchemy to bring their mom back from the dead. They assemble all the components that make up a human being, arrange it in the transmutation circle, and attempt the resurrection. But here's the tricky concept that the manga plays around with. It's that of the human soul, that spiritual component that has yet to be quantified by any kind of science within or outside of the story. And as you can imagine, the revival goes terribly wrong, and something on the other side of life tries to pull Ed and Al towards it. In a last-ditch effort, the older brother Ed is able to save himself with only the loss of his leg, but he also sacrifices his right arm in order to bring whatever he can of his brother Al back as well. And all he could retrieve is that which we call a soul, sealing it within a nearby suit of armor. Now, hollow and cold, Al is trapped within this armor, with his body lost. But determined to bring him back, and to get back his own lost arm and leg, Edward vows to find a way to return to this point between life and death, and fix their situation. The two of them embark on a journey looking for a legendary item called a Philosopher's Stone, said to have the power to do just that. And that's just the general setup for the two main characters. I haven't even began to touch on the world building, the military, the government conspiracies behind the scenes, and so much more. It adds an incredible element with its amount of characters, sometimes overwhelmingly so, all with their own motivations, desires, fears, and of course, tragedies. And just as the manga is able to balance its many different characters, it also does so with its themes. On a large scale, there is a lot to say about society at large and how we feel about those who are different than us, and how this segregation and tribalism can turn good men into murderers, believing they are doing it for the greater good. It dabbles into ideas of playing God and harnessing that power, if we have the right to change and alter the natural order just because we can. But on a smaller scale, it's a story about connection and, well, brotherhood. How those bonds that we have with people give us motivation to continue forward even after everything was taken away from us, and what happens when those bonds are severed. How people turn to darkness and despair once connections are lost and taken away from them. The Elric brothers themselves showcase this in everything that they do. They are a unit, a team. They work best together, but they are also individuals with separate goals and separate personalities. The same can be said for Scar and his brother, the Armstrong siblings, or even relationships like Colonel Mustang and Hughes. They're not related, not real brothers, but a brotherhood and unity exists between them, stronger than most relationships. And the more I think about this large-scale, small-scale dynamic that the story has going on, the more I think about how it all relates to the central premise and philosophies that it tries to teach and explain. It comes down to my favorite quote from the manga and anime, and I think my favorite sequence within the entire story. And it's simply this: all is one, one is all. During a flashback sequence of some of Ed and Al's training while they're learning alchemy, their teacher puts both of them on an island where they have to survive by themselves for some extended period of time. It's confusing to them as they are attempting to learn about this science, but now they are in a survival situation. What does any of this have to do with alchemy, they wonder? No food given to them, no connection with the outside world, just the two of them. They're forced to turn wood into shelter or to fire, use friction to make that fire, to fish in order to eat. As advanced as things may become, we can never ignore that we are the same organic matter on Earth as everything else, and the bare necessities of survival teaches you core fundamental truths that no book ever could. All is one, and one is all. We are not just living in the world or in the universe, we are part of it forever. Ed realizes he will eat the food that nourishes him until one day he dies and nourishes the earth himself. The earth eats him and another animal eats from that. The small concepts and the large concepts. The world is so massive that you are smaller than an ant in comparison, but ants still have a part to play, and without just one of those ants, there would be no whole. Everything is connected, and everything flows and changes into something else through this natural progression. So even though the individual can feel insignificant, it calls towards the idea that there is no singular one individual because we are all part of an entire being, which is the universe. Coming back to the main philosophy of alchemy with equivalent exchange. You can turn one thing into another thing. You can turn wood from a tree into a table. You can take energy from something that you ate and use it as your own. But the universe can never give you more than what you choose to put into it. On a small scale, the war against the Ishvalans all started because of the death of a singular child. A one escalated until it involved an all. On a small scale, a man was killed in a phone booth. On a higher level, it sparked a deep investigation into the government that was hiding conspiracies big enough to shake the entire world. This is an all-encompassing story about an entity trying to harness the power of God, but it's also a story about just two brothers, their love for one another, their loyalty, and how they refuse to ever give up on one another, no matter what the cost. And I think that Fullmetal Alchemist is set up this way deliberately. Unlike a lot of other manga series, it's not really separated into different story arcs so much, but tells one long, complete story. There are so many characters, to the point where I occasionally forget about some of them until they're reintroduced, and then I think, oh yeah, where have they been? But even so, even the smallest, most secondary characters still play vital and important roles in the overall narrative. Nobody is really just there for show, and I think that being able to utilize even your smallest characters to make a difference plays completely into the themes of importance of the overall whole that the messages behind all the exciting battle scenes are trying to say. Alongside its cast of amazing main characters, there's also a whole team of villains. Again, each with their own distinct personality, but given their names, it's a little bit easier to understand them. They are called homunculi, artificially created humans through alchemy, and each have the title of one of the 7 deadly sins: sloth, greed, envy, gluttony, pride, wrath, and lust. Oh, lust. Another big titty goth GF to add to my list of waifus. Anyways, that's besides the point. The 7 deadly sins, sins of mankind, aspects of people that usually lead towards their downfall once indulged upon, which already is unique enough to make them antagonists, but when you think about the place of religion in this story, it also becomes that much more interesting. For the most part, religion and belief in God in this story is seen as a little bit outdated and not something to take logically serious. But then you remember that it's impossible to account for a human soul. Like everything else within alchemy, it cannot be created. This is why the idea of a homunculus is like an old wives' tale, because there are reasons the homunculus exists in the story, but I don't really want to go into spoilers. But the interesting thing that Fullmetal does is not prove or disprove the concept of God. Instead, it treats God like an accumulation of all things and all knowledge. You can call it God, or you could just call it the universe, the all communicating back towards you, but that also means part of that all is you. Extremely high-stake concepts, and perhaps something we as humans have no right or even no need to understand. Maybe there are physical limitations for a reason, that this gate between worlds is something that we should never see, at least not while we are still returning to the living world. But anyway, if I haven't lost you guys yet, I know I'm talking more about the concepts than the actual story, but since I want to keep this spoiler-free, and because Fullmetal Alchemist is already as popular as it is, I figured I would focus more on the ideas behind it that I resonate and find interesting, because I'm sure there's already a ton of videos out already just summarizing the plot. What draws me to Fullmetal Alchemist isn't the fights, though they are amazing, one of my favorites being with Führer Bradley and just watching how much he absolutely devastates everyone. The man took on a motherfucking tank with a sword and won. He's a badass. And also, people will kill me if I don't at least mention the heartbreak of Nina. But if for some reason you have never read or watched it, that's really a reveal that's better left experiencing on your own. Just try not to cry when you keep realizing just how fucked up it actually is. But anyways, the thing that truly draws me to Fullmetal Alchemist is precisely its philosophies on life and energy and equal exchange, because you can make that concept as high fantasy as you want, but the core fundamental truths remain. And it creates this sense of realism within this super fantastical story, and also treats it with absolute respect, as I feel we all should. It's important to know our limitations as humans and be able to accept them. But it's also important to know just how far we are physically capable of going, so long as we respect the process of getting there. And, maybe just enjoy the process as we get there as well. Reliving Ed and Al's journey to get their bodies back was a total treat to re-experience in manga form. If you have seen Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, then I can verify now that it follows the manga to an absolute T. It seriously felt like I was watching the show again, especially when I put on the OST in the background. But if you love that version and never read the manga, I still highly encourage you to do so. Anyways, guys, if you have read the Fullmetal Alchemist manga, or if you just love the anime, tell me about why or why not down below. Do you think it's a masterpiece? Do you think it's overrated? Or just somewhere in between? Tell me your first feelings experiencing it, and anything else that you would like to share. Other than that, guys, I truly thank you for the support and for watching this video. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. It really does help me out. And check out the links below in the description if you want to help the channel on that deeper level, like joining the Patreon. Other than that, guys, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time.